We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with the Liberty Nation Durham Report special panel with Graham J. Noble, Scott DeCasenta, and Tim Donner. Now, we've discussed the wherewithal, the media, the impact of this thing, and the impact on the agencies. But now I'd like to dive into the legal section. So we're going to ask Scott DeCasenta, as our resident legal eagle, to do some of the heavy lifting here. Now, I found it quite confusing that pretty much every left-leaning media outlet focused on how few criminal charges were actually made from the report. But was that ever
Wait a minute. You found a left-wing outlet that covered the release of the Durham report?
I wrote an article on this, and it was everyone was a poo-pooing of the report, which is shocking because I went back and I looked through their coverage from the very beginning of the Steele dossier, and they were calling Trump a cult leader, a mafia boss. Yes. Saying that, you know, the people have drank the orange Kool-Aid, and about how bad his Russian connections were. But let's get deal with it. Was the point of the Durham report to get criminal convictions, in your opinion, Scott?
No, it doesn't seem like it was written that way. It seemed like it was written to expose the corruption of the FBI. You know, all these decisions were made by people whose motives were corrupt. You know, we talked about how it was alluded that, like, you know, that somehow, like, they shouldn't have pounced on this threat of a whisper of a rumor in order to trigger this massive investigation. But that kind of analysis gives them the credit of being honest dealers. They weren't honest dealers. They were corrupt from the inception. So they were going to do it because they had corrupt motives, which were they didn't want Donald Trump to be president of the United States. They wanted Hillary Clinton to be president because of their own power schemes. So, you know, at the end of the day, I say this often at various outlets on libertynation.com where I'm talking about the decision to prosecute or the decision to investigate. There's this burlesque, I think, that the top officials kind of perform, and that media agrees with, the idea that these are not all political decisions. Who to prosecute for what, when, and how are political decisions. We've got a train wreck of a thing happening right now with this Alvin Bragg prosecution of Donald Trump for a crime that nobody's ever been prosecuted for in the history of ever. And we all know that it's because he wants to get Donald Trump for political reasons, and it's not about a real crime, has nothing to do with protecting the citizens of New York or justice or anything like that. It's just about getting Trump, and it's happening right now in America. You know, in our biggest, supposed to be the best city.
Singling people out as targets or to set an example is not in the American system of justice. At least it never has been until Donald Trump came along. Sure, there's other people that have been targeted, but this is an incredibly high bar that they have set. And they do it shamelessly. In other words, essentially, they deny, the media will deny their bias, then they will admit it. Then they will wear it as a sleeve, on their sleeve as a badge of honor. And then they will use it as a weapon against the other side. I mean, we're seeing this vicious cycle. And again, as long as the FBI, again, the problem with this Durham report is that all the so-called reforms at the FBI have already been done before this report was issued. So what are we supposed to say? Well, there was a problem then, but, well, they changed management, so everything's going to be okay. I wonder what percentage of the American people think that that is acceptable anymore, to just say, well, that was the Comey FBI. It was a train wreck. But, you know, at least Christopher Wray has straightened out the ship at the FBI. It goes a lot deeper and it's a lot more rotten than any single administration at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
I should point out it was also the McCabe FBI, who is now on CNN as a paid contributor. poo-pooing the whole Durham report. Which,
well, it's because he's got an incredible degree of credibility, Mark.
Now, let's do a little checklist here, a legal checklist if we can. So the Clinton campaign funded, at least in part, the Steele dossier, which was the impetus for the entire investigation. Now, CIA John Brenner, he knew because he briefed the White House, and then the FBI took surely there was some cooperation there, but it basically marred Trump's entire time in office. It's dominated his reputation for the last 6 or 7 years. Now, morally wrong, sure. Is it a crime to produce a dossier on your political opponent, give it to the federal agencies, and then have them investigate and essentially make Donald Trump look like a traitor to his country for 6 or 7 years?
So I'm assuming this is I'm fielding this question. And
you are, Scott.
I'll just go ahead. If you think about what has been done to some of the January 6th defendants, okay? I'm not talking about the ones that were in a tussle with security guards or anything like that. I'm just talking about people who entered the Capitol building in a time and place that they weren't supposed to enter the Capitol building, and what's been done to them in our criminal justice system. And I can tell you that a mildly creative assistant U.S. attorney could come up with a laundry list of crimes against these people, including and especially conspiracy to deny us our civil rights by perverting the election. I mean, you can make up any number of cases for any number of federal crimes that these people have committed. But again, the decision to prosecute is a political one, and they're not going to be prosecuted. And I don't even think they're going to be prosecuted by a Republican administration's attorney general, because there's not the political will to go that deep. I spoke with somebody just the other day who I was talking about the next presidential election with, and this person said, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's the only one who's actually could potentially go in there and really clean house the way that this person thought that it should be done, because he's not married to any, establishment sort of conventions. And I think that just, we can't expect that that's going to happen because it's all baked in, unfortunately. And let me just say this, because I didn't have a chance to say it earlier, or didn't think to say it earlier, which is that I have the cure for all this. And the cure is a massive reduction in the size and scope of the federal government. The reason why these people are fighting so hard to control it is because of the billions and trillions of dollars in spending and influence over every facet of our life. If the federal government was whittled down to its constitutional authority and only controlled what it was supposed to, we wouldn't have half of this trouble, and even less than that.
The answer to almost every problem is less government, as far as I'm concerned there, Scott. Now, Graham, let's wrap this up with you. Give me your final take on this.
The FBI has a department called the Office of Professional Responsibility, and so does the DOJ. And these were the people who were really at fault, because the Office of Professional Responsibility should have looked at this entire Steele dossier thing at the very beginning and said, you do not have enough here to go on. An agency did not follow its own guidelines and did not act in a responsible manner and say at the very beginning, we can't investigate this because we have absolutely no evidence that anything wrong was done. And that's the problem right there.
A failure on multiple levels with two key victims, President Donald Trump and the American people. Gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, right here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to offer my thanks to our superb Durham Report panelists, longtime host of this here show, Tim Donner, Graham J. Noble, and Scott D. Cosenza. And as always, extend my thanks and appreciation to you, the listeners, for joining us here each week. My final thoughts for this week. The Durham investigation and ultimate report were never meant to be about sending Hillary Clinton to the slammer. It was not meant to be a vindication of Donald Trump, although in many respects it was. what the purpose really was to discover if the FBI went beyond the scope of its remit in pursuing a person against whom the agency appeared biased. Now, in that regards, despite what the media might say to poo-poo the report, or what the White House refuses to answer even basic questions about, in that regards, it was a resounding success. The American people now have 300 pages of proof that serious mistakes were made that resulted in a multi-year hate campaign against the man responsible for running the country. It's the old refrain, mistakes were made. Well, perhaps this time, the people will not forget that mistakes were made, nor who made them. And perhaps next time, the nation won't be the subject of international ridicule, thanks to an overzealous agency that sought to put partisanship above truth. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.